Are you ready? Stand by.
Welcome to the Three Gun Show, your source for technique, strategy, and match recon, brought to you by Armalite Rifles, LAG Tactical, and Breda Shotguns. I'm your host, Dave Hartman. My guest this week is USPSA Grandmaster Charlie Perez, and we discuss how to practice mental discipline in daily life to help your match performance, what is dry fire versus dry practice, and how to avoid the wrong type of practice as an adult learner. And I give Charlie the opportunity to share some things about Three Gun that he's observed and how we can be better. This podcast is brought to you by Breda USA, Italian shotguns that are the best in the world. And this is a shotgun tech tip from Team Breda. Hey, this is Dave Hartman from the Three Gun Show, and I'm with Cheyenne Dalton from Team Breda, and she has a tech tip for us today. Cheyenne, what do you got?
So I think it's really important to practice using your match saver on your shotgun. It can really save your life on a stage, if you run dry. So what I like to do is set up a few targets, load 2 or 3 shells, and practice running the shotgun dry and using a match saver. So usually the match saver is right in front of your port, and you're going to take your left hand and scrape the shell back into the chamber and close the bolt, and that's how you do it.
Awesome. That's your tech tip from Cheyenne Dalton from Team Breda. Check out Breda's B12i 3-gun ready inertia-driven shotgun at bredausa.com. That's BREDA. This podcast is brought to you by LAG Tactical. I've been using LAG gear for 3 years now, and I just got an upgrade into their new for 2018 MCS mag pouches. MCS stands for Modular Carry System and is a 2-piece design that fits most double-stack 9 and 40 mags and most AR mags. That means I can loan gear to someone in need on the range, even if we're shooting different guns. I've been using these pouches for many matches now, and they've been great. I like that you can choose the retention based on what is required by the stage, speed demon or locked in tight. I've been shooting the low-cut Supernova holster as well, and it has been a dream. They make it in a mid and high cut too if you're into that, but I'm digging the low cut, super fast draws, and plenty of retention when you need it. Check them out, lagtactical.com, and use code 3GS in all caps to save yourself 10% when placing an order. Thank you for tuning into the podcast this week and for being a part of the Three Gun Show community. As I record this, I just got back from the Vortex Shooter Source 3-Gun in Texas, and not only was the match amazing, but I got to meet a lot of you and shoot with a bunch of you amazing folks as well. And I thank you. I can't thank you enough for all the kind words and encouragement with the podcast. We're kicking butt over here, and we have so many cool things coming in the next few months. I want you to stay tuned for new ways that the Three Gun Show can serve you and your practical shooting habit, because we got some good stuff in store. This podcast is a very fun one because I have USPSA Grandmaster Charlie Perez, who came to the Three Gun Show World Headquarters to talk practical shooting with me. Charlie is a hometown hero that plays on the national stage in limited division, is a match director here in Colorado, and regularly holds training classes here as well. For the last couple of years, Charlie has been working on a book which is called Path of Focused Effort, a learning guide for practical shooting. I can't say enough good things about this book. I bought a copy of my own. So if you like what Charlie's style is in this podcast and like what he has to say, be sure to pick up your own copy. I'll have a link in the show notes at 3gunshow.com/episode 185. Now enjoy this one with Charlie Perez. Charlie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on.
Well, I'm excited to have you here, man. Local Denver hero, Charlie Perez. You're someone who in my entire shooting career I've heard a lot about. Shot with you a couple times. Even shot a match that you put on, the Mile High Showdown.
Yeah, I do a lot of shooting around here, and mostly just pistol stuff and USPSA matches and that kind of stuff.
Well, this is your chance to talk to a bunch of three gunners and tell them what you really think about them.
Wow.
I know.
Wow.
So If you've been holding back all these years.
I really don't hold back much. If people really know me, I kind of just state what I think about things. So
nice.
If we have to dig into certain subjects, we definitely can do that.
Dude, well, you're going to fit in good around here. One of the questions that I want to ask you is what three gunners are missing about pistol skills. So stew on that one for a minute, and we'll get to it, and I won't let you forget. But Charlie, I want to take it back here and kind of introduce you to the audience. So why don't you give the listeners an idea of who you are off the range, what you do when you're not shooting?
So I'm Charlie Perez, and I work in the data storage industry. So, data backup stuff. And I work on the service side. And the easiest way to kind of boil it down is I like to tell people I fix broken people or broken stuff.
Nice.
Or a combination of both. So,
do you tell people to restart their computer a lot?
Not really, but I do tell people to read the procedures a lot.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So I'm like the last line of defense before the engineering team gets involved. So by the time issues get to me, the customers are like super happy and everything's working perfectly. No,
they've already talked to all kinds of other people that are having a great day.
It's an absolute train wreck, and I got to smooth things over and basically swoop in and kind of save the day, kind of thing.
Nice.
So
does that fit your personality?
I think it really does, because by the time those issues get to me, there's no more time for sugarcoating anything.
Right.
It's more of, here's where we're at, and here's what we got to do to get to our goal, and let's do it. Roll up our sleeves and make it happen.
I gotcha. How long have you been doing that?
So this is my 18th year working for the same company, which is kind of interesting because I didn't I didn't think it was going to last that long, but I show up and they still pay me every 2 weeks. So
sweet.
I just keep coming back.
Can't beat that.
Yeah.
Awesome. And so somewhere along the lines, you picked up practical shooting as a sport.
Yeah.
So when did that happen? You've been in the same profession 18 years. When did practical shooting start for you?
So practical shooting started for me in 2008, and it was actually I found out about it by accident, really.
Oh, really?
And before practical shooting, I did competition racing of radio control cars.
Okay.
And I did that for almost 20 years, from a young teen to an adult. And I did that for a long, long time and had sponsors, and it was kind of semi-professional kind of thing. I had people flying me around in that kind of situation, go race RC cars. And it got to the point where I had done so much of it that it wasn't really mine anymore, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it really does. Expand on that, though. I mean, I totally got what you meant there, but expand on that for the audience.
As far as it's basically, when somebody's paying you, or at least paying your expenses and providing you products to compete with and win races with and that kind of stuff, then that event or achievement is no longer yours, right? You're basically doing that for somebody else. You're a hired gun, so to say, to go in there and slap some people around and show them how good their stuff is, and then leave and go do it the next weekend somewhere else.
Yeah.
And it just got too much of a job for me. And really, the last year I raced is kind of unfortunate, because the last 3 years that I raced, I was really in the I'm over it mode, but I'm really good at it. So I had that kind of seesaw between I'm over it, but I'm doing really well. And that was a super difficult thing. Like, I could have probably quit a couple years earlier.
Yeah.
But since I was able to do really well, and I really kind of factor it down to the give a crap factor, was a lot less. Like, I really don't care. Like, I knew that, I was practicing enough and had the skills and experience enough to do it, that if I just showed up and did my thing, I could do pretty well. And, that got me through a lot of races and won a lot of things and that kind of situation. And it was a lot of fun through the years of doing it. And through all of that time, I had 4 national titles doing it. So I got out of that, and I was like, well, I always liked tinkering on stuff and wrenching on things. And growing up as a kid, I had classic cars that I like to rebuild and that kind of stuff. And I always like hot rods and whatnot. And so I decided I wanted to do instead of doing a classic car, I wanted to do a late model GTO. So I went and bought a 2005 GTO and then went bananas on that thing and doing all kinds of mods and craziness to that thing. And that really pacified my fiddling requirement.
Yeah.
Of wrenching on stuff and fixing things and troubleshooting things and that kind of situation. But it really was missing the competition side of it.
So you never raced the car?
I took it to Banamere a couple times and slapped around a couple Corvettes on the road or whatever, but there's really nothing, like, I'm not really big into street racing and that kind of stuff. And
right.
So, and drag racing was like way outside of my budget. So it was like, and I knew that anything I get into, I'm like not tippy-toeing into stuff. So
really,
I'm either all the way in or I'm out, so and it just, like I said, by happenstance, every year I was part of a GTO club, and we would have mod days where we'd help each other fix each other's cars, and then we'd have track days where we would do it like a test and tune day out at Banamere.
Yeah.
But in order to do that, it's pretty expensive to rent out the track for a day just for a small group of 20 guys or whatever. So what we ended up doing is the club members would host classes about the skills or things that they knew about, like somebody would do like a computer class or like a scuba class or different stuff of the other hobbies that they were doing. And one of the shooters, or one of the people that was part of that club, is also a shooter. His name is Mark Pasamanik.
No kidding.
Yes.
That's funny, because in my head I'm like, I know Mark's got a GTO. I'm wondering if this is leaning
so that's
that way.
That's Mark and I knew each other well before I even knew about practical shooting. And he, for that event, he decided to do it's kind of like a pseudo like introduction to CCW / competition stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And he took a group of us GTOers up to the Clear Creek Range and set up a little, like, it was a mini stage, and went over all the safety stuff and that kind of thing. And we went and I'd use borrowed stuff and all that kind of thing. And we went and shot, and I was like, oh my God, you can draw from the holster and run around and, do crazy stuff with guns. And
this is okay.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, this is legal. Where's the police? So that was really my introduction to practical shooting. And after that, I talked to Mark, and he was super gracious with his time and really helping me with, what different kind of shooting sports are there. And he explained all the, the Steel Challenge and IDPA and USPSA and 3-gun and all this different stuff. And he was really smart in the factor. He said, he advised me to basically just go buy a off the shelf gun. Don't go bananas and buy a $3,000, $4,000 gun and go crazy. So just buy something normal and then test it out and see, is this really something you want to do before you spend or waste a bunch of money?
Right.
And so at that time, that was in 2008. And at the time, that's when Springfield just came out with their XDM line of pistols, and the first caliber they came out with was 40. And I was like, well, that's the newest, latest, greatest thing. That must be the best gun out there, right? So,
and 40's got the stopping power.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny because when my cousin is actually a Denver detective, and I asked him, after I took that, I was like, hey, you carry a gun every day, and so let's go do some shooting, and you tell me about this stuff a little bit, and I remember being at the range, and he picked up 3 cases. He picked up a 45, a 40, and a 9, and he put them all inside each other. And he's like, "Where do you want to be?" And I'm like, "I'll just go in the middle." So that's why I ended up getting a 40.
That's awesome.
It's like the most unscientific method possible of picking a caliber. So that was my introduction to practical shooting, and I used that XDM for, I think it was a grand total of like maybe, I don't know, 5-6 matches in shooting production in USPSA.
You shot production with an XDM?
Yes.
With a 40 caliber?
40
XDM?
caliber, yes. And so
did you not know about, I'm sorry to interrupt, but did you not know about limited?
I did know about limited, but at that time I was like, I didn't want to, that gun was new enough that they didn't have like all the mag extensions.
Okay.
That kind of stuff just yet. So I was like, I don't want to, if I really want to dive into one division or the other, I don't want to have some kind of Franken gun to try to, like this dude's trying to shoot open with Glocks and craziness, that kind of stuff. So, I shot production for a few matches, and my very first match actually was a IDPA match that was a classifier match, like
Oh.
in IDPA, that like it's a whole
that's
it's just like a whole match. It's just a classifier.
and so correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like one stage, right?
Yes, it's
And you
just
just
one stage and
do-
multiple strings of different
Yeah.
stuff. And it was
What'd you think?
it was nothing against IDPA, but it was a pretty horrible first experience.
Yeah.
Not because of the sanctioning body or anybody there. It was because it was up at Clear Creek, the range up there, and it started raining like cats and dogs about halfway through the match. And it basically, there's probably like 60 of us crammed in those little shacks. And I'm like, so this is what matches are? This is kind of weird,
Yeah, I mean drag racing, they just they call it, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, so when do we go home? I mean, that kind of thing. But I powered through that, and I think that I had shot that whole classifier stage, and after that, I think my next match was actually a USPSA match, and then after doing USPSA, playing that game for a while, then I went back and played IDPA just as let's have some fun with this and see how many procedurals I can get, kind of stuff. But that's pretty much the genesis of my practical shooting, which it's kind of interesting because as fun as it is, and as good as these gun games are, and improving your marksmanship skills and that kind of stuff, and how do you handle guns and safety and all that stuff, it's just, I think it's a tragedy that it's so like this obscure thing that the average person doesn't know about. And
Dude,
I think that USPSA and all the gun game sports, they do a pretty crappy job of marketing to the masses to get non-practical shooters.
I totally agree. Do you have any thoughts on how they can change that?
I think that they need to basically hire people that are non-shooters to kind of go through their experience of this thing called practical shooting, and then kind of bring it to them that way. Because it's kind of like, even if like you go to a drag race, even a club like a local drag race, a weekend thing, and you go back in the pits and you're like, oh my God, that guy's got a fifth wheel and he's got, $50,000 in that car. I could never do that, that kind of thing. But you totally don't see the dude that just rented a car just so he can beat on it for the weekend. And he's having just as much fun for this $50 you rented that car for.
Yeah.
So I'm not a big marketing guy, but I think it's a tragedy that there's not a more grassroots, I don't know what the real ultimate word is for that, but I just think it's weird that in all the gun stores that we have around there, and the Midway USAs and the Brownells and those kind of places, they're not smacking in the face with, here's where you can play with your toys to buy more stuff, right?
I tell you what, so not naming any names, but I have several friends in the industry that work for companies that market 3-gun specific products, right? And I'm like, hey, can I send you a shitload of stickers and you can stuff one in every box of 3-gun product you sell? And they're like, no, we can't do that. I'm like, why? Why wouldn't you want people to know, like, this is a gamer thing that they can use for games,
Yeah.
And it is odd, isn't it? I mean, because like I guess when you buy, let's look at like Ford Racing. When you buy like their Cobra Jet thing, it's like, I don't know, what is it now, $130,000 or whatever, and it does 10-second flat or something. You actually get an NHRA membership with that.
Yeah.
And they have another model, and I don't remember what it is now because I haven't been keeping up with it, but you get an SCCA membership.
Yeah.
Like there are avenues when they sell
like
you their
built together.
Yeah, they sell you their race products, and you like Porsche is a great example.
Yeah.
You get the Porsche Club of America, membership or whatever. Yeah, that's an interesting thing, man.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I think it's really hard to have a one size fits all solution for that.
Yeah.
Because I think I kind of group people into, shooter or gun owners into 3 different groups. I think there's like the gun collectors that like, the new shiny thing that it sits in their safe and
it's art.
It's an art thing or collector kind of thing that they like to do. Then there's the plinker guys that go out and they like shooting and they like to hone their marksmanship, but they have like zero interest in anything competitive. And then you have the competitor kind of people that could really care less what the gun looks like or, that as long as it gets the job done.
Right.
And I think that a lot of the marketing tries to traverse those groups, which doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right. It's really hard. It'd be like trying to, have a bike store and sell bike racing stuff to the guy that just wants to ride his bike on the weekend.
Yeah.
So
that's a really good point too. And when you have those conversations with larger companies, like, hey, why don't we do some, marketing based on this, three-gun sanctioning body like UML, Three Gun Nation, USPSA, whatever it is, or, IDPA, USPSA. Their thing is like, well, it's such a small part of our demographic.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, no shit, man. I want to grow it. Like,
yeah, exactly.
I know. I need your help in getting it bigger.
Yeah.
There's that part of it as well, where, it's the chicken or the egg kind of thing. Like, is this going to be a big mainstream sport? It's going to be niche forever if we don't help ourselves grow. And by ourselves, I mean the industry, like ammunition, firearms, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
I would also throw like another category in though is like the tactical bros, right? Like
I don't even recognize those people.
I've thought about this a lot, Charlie, and I honestly think like part of it is that it's something cool you can do with guns that is not punching holes in paper, and they don't know that there's anything else. So they're like, hey, you know what? I'm an accountant, and I work for a large corporation. I sit in a cubicle, and I have to keep myself all prim and proper. Mm-hmm. But on the weekend, I throw on my plate carrier and my blowout kit, and I shoot, my AR-15 at targets 30 yards away and make a big, pizza pie shaped hole in them. And I'm really excited about my combat accuracy. Yeah. But there's a lot of marketing that goes in with that as well. And there's a lot of coolness that goes in with that. And there's people out there that don't even know that.
Well, it's because those guys buy widgets, right?
Yeah.
They're always buying the next widget because if they actually had to like get a shot timer and test or hone some skill, then they'd quickly realize that it's really not about the gear, it's about the skill.
Okay, so in that context, you brought up another thing. So the guy that's holding the shot timer behind the dude in the plate carrier, that again is the accountant. He's not actually going kicking doors anywhere, and he's like mag dumping into a paper target that's 8 yards away.
Yeah.
What are you timing? What exactly are you timing? That's what I always want to know. We were talking about social media before we got started here. I spent a lot of time on Instagram and following like hashtags and seeing what's cool, what's trending in our niche in our industry.
Yeah.
And holy cow, there's so much of the tactical thing out there, and how quick you can draw your appendix carry with your your garment and stuff like that with a target that's a rubber dummy and it's like 4 yards in front of you. Like, I mean, I guess that's cool for Instagram and stuff, but I always wonder like half those things, like, what are you timing, man? Like you're just doing a mag dump.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to understand other people's loves, right?
Yeah.
And hobbies are hobbies, it's hard for me to just like the gun haters say, oh, why would you need this or that? It'd be the same way as me saying, why do you need that plate carrier?
Oh yeah,
maybe you need it. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, like that, I'm a huge hypocrite because that's like how I got into it, right? Like I did those types of things and did the mag dump and the look, I'm shooting a 2 foot square piece of steel offhand at 180 yards. Can you believe that? And this is amazing. It's only a red dot, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But when I found that there was more challenging things out there, like 3-gun, then I kind of strayed that way. But I didn't know what I didn't know.
Well, I think that that's where people kind of transition between having fun versus concertedly honing skill. Mm-hmm. Right? It'd be like taking a competitive foot racer person, right? A 100-yard dash person, right? Mm-hmm. There's plenty of people that probably exercise every day and run 100 yards, and they don't really care how long that takes them because that's just a thing that they do. Right. And then you have the Olympic competitors that are doing crazy amounts of practice and honing and skill honing to get that last 10th or 100th of a second out of that 100 yards.
Right.
And those are two different mentalities totally. And I think that's what, I think that if comes back to the marketing side of it, where if we were to market the shooting games to other games, right, we would probably get a better yield of people attending practical shooting stuff. If we went to bike races or drag races or whatever, other competitive sports that are non-shooting stuff, just, that would be stuff where there's competitive people that like to do competitive things and find the maximum performance of stuff. I think that's where we'd have the best traction on bringing more people into the shooting sports.
That's a really good thought. That's a really good thought. And it, it kind of reminds me of, in Colorado here, we got this big race every Memorial Day called the Boulder Boulder, right? It's a 10K. It's been going on for 30 years or something like that. How many people run that thing? Like 20,000?
Yeah, there's a ton.
It's like a shitload of people that run that thing. And there's probably 100 people that are serious about it.
Yeah. The rest of the people are there just for...
They're for the exercise, the accomplishment, the camaraderie, just to say they did. They're there for the T-shirt, a lot of them. So how is that... How can you spread that type of culture to something like competitive shooting? Like, is it possible to do that?
What do you mean spread the culture? Spread the competition culture, or
no? Spread the culture of like, okay, well, we got these 100 people that are taking it serious, but we also have these other several hundred people that are coming and high-fiving and having a good time and eating orange slices afterwards and stuff like that. I mean, I know how to take care of the orange slice thing. I'll just bring them, but
But I think it's easy to segregate them because they usually start the serious people first, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right. So if you just show up with 100 business cards and whoever's in the front of the stack, just hand them out.
Okay.
Right?
Well, what about the casual people though that are there to have fun?
Well,
so there's room for that in gun games, right?
I think that everybody's having fun, but I think deep down, people are always measuring.
Yeah.
Right. There's no matter how, what people are like, oh, I don't care. I'm just here to have fun, or I'm just here to train, or there's a measuring stick somewhere.
Yeah.
Right. That they're measuring their performance against something, whether that's themselves, usually others. Right. But there's a measuring stick. Right. So it's hard. I think it's hard to find the people that need that measuring stick.
Okay.
And I don't know the magical answer for that.
Huh.
Maybe we need to do more GTO, CCW / competition days.
I tell you what, there is a large crossover between gun guys and car guys.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's a couple people in the chat. We're doing this live on Facebook for the Patreon group, and I'm looking at DJ Petro. I'm looking at Kevin Travis, and I'm looking at Lou Mendez. All three of those dudes that are sitting here watching us, are the first three to comment, have racing pedigrees. Like Kevin had a super fast Subaru that he would drag race, and DJ, comes from dirt bike racing and wave runner racing and stuff. So there is a lot of crossover there. So you might be onto something in finding, maybe sending like some ambassadors out to, or missionaries, sending missionaries out to to car clubs and gatherings and stuff like that.
Sure.
That's actually not a bad idea, man.
Yeah.
Write that down. We're going to do that. All right. Well, we kind of got off topic with a cool one, but we do that a lot here, and there's some gold in that. But back to when you got started in practical shooting, right? So you got your XDM, you got your 40, you're shooting production division, you shot that for 5 matches.
Yeah.
And then what did you decide from there? Did you decide to go whole hog?
Yeah. So at that point, I knew that production wasn't going to work for me simply because I had purchased the wrong gun for that, right? It was a 40 caliber gun. I wasn't reloading at that point, so the ammunition is more expensive for it, and realistically, all the reloads and that kind of stuff, it was hard enough as it was to figure out the stage plans and that kind of stuff without also layering on, I got to do all these crazy reloads throughout the stage. And
that's a very good point.
I liked the having more ammo in the limited or open divisions, and I didn't want to spend crazy money on an open gun. And a little piece of me was always like, well, if I get anything out of this, if I hone my marksmanship skills with iron sights, that's going to at least enable me to be able to pick up any gun with iron sights and be able to shoot it proficiently.
Right.
Right. So I didn't want to go off into the weeds in some weird red dot thing or whatnot.
Did you look at them as like race guns, like laser guns, like it was kind of cheating?
Not really, because coming from the RC racing stuff, there was different class in there. They didn't call it divisions; they called it classes, and each car class had its different rules and modifications and craziness you could do to those things. And
so you were kind of familiar with that to begin with.
Yeah, and so to me, I knew that each division was its own little animal, and I really liked and really what it came down to is I started looking at the match results and seeing how poorly I was doing compared to others, and more importantly, I was looking at where's the bulk of the heat, the competition. And when I was starting in the game back then, the heat was in limited. There was a few very good open shooters, but the overall depth of competition in limited, both locally and in the area, was in limited. And when I was really thinking about it, it's like, hey, if I really want to hone my performance and do really well against others, I have to be able to measure my performance against others. And I want to do that in a division where I can, because there's the heat to do that. So that's when I decided to switch to limited. And my first, it's funny because I switched to limited. I think I had like 1 or 2 club matches with that. And then my first major match was the Area 2 match down in Phoenix. And so that was my very first major match, and it was a super humbling experience because it's one of those deals where that's when they used to, it was before practice score and all that. And they'd print out the results, and it's one of those where you look at the list and you're like, oh, you know, so you got to like start at the bottom and then look up and it'd be a little bit more that kind of thing. So
I've totally had that many times, even with practice score, but now it's just like scroll.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's, I've pretty much been a limited division specialist since then. You know, I've focused pretty much my whole practical shooting efforts on iron-sighted guns with lots of bullets, which is limited. And I've dabbled in other divisions, playing here and there, you know, shooting open a little bit to get used to, you know, how do you actually run a dot well, and what do you have to see and that kind of stuff for that. But my love is always, it's kind of like, I keep telling myself that I'll stop shooting limited and switch to something else when I figure it out. And
nice.
I'm still trying to figure it out. And I think that kind of the moving goal markers or whatever, it seems to be my vision, you know, and as my vision gets worse through time, then I have to refigure things out and change up prescription and glasses or sight configurations and that kind of stuff. And that feeds on my tinkering want, you know, so I get to fiddle with stuff and test things out and that kind of thing. And that's, you know, for me, like a lot of people, they know I like to shoot a lot and get really serious about performance and shooting, but I'm as equally as, you know, deep into the testing stuff and fiddling on things and figuring out configurations of guns and whatnot. You know, and when I started out limited shooting the EAA Witness Limited, and that was more budgetary than anything else, because I didn't want to spend thousands of dollars on a 2011 to shoot limited with an STI or something like that. And an easy budget option to that was the EAA Witness Limited. And I shot those for many years, and it's basically, it's the Indian, not the arrow kind of thing. I mean, if it's reliable and the bullets go where you need them to go and it has enough bullets in it, you know, it's competitive. And I fiddled the crap out of those things, and it got to the point where the gun, like EAA, is the sole distributor of all EAA and Tanfolio stuff, and they really made it difficult to buy piece parts. Like I would crack a slide and they wouldn't sell just a slide, so I'd have to buy a whole upper, and that would get expensive. You know, it got to the point where I was cracking 2 and 3 slides a year, a season.
Oh, you're kidding.
And I say that because I don't say that in a way, oh, their guns suck. It was because I was going fiddle crazy and lightening them and super light springs. And to me, the slides cracking was like, it's a consumable part, right? It's going to crack because it's super lightened and the slide velocity is crazy, and it's going to break at some point, and I expect it to break. But it got to the point where I was spending like STI money every year on uppers, and I was like, screw it, I'll just switch over to the STI guns and that kind of platform, and then started relearning that stuff and going fiddle crazy with those. I've probably thrown away more gun parts and tested things and ruined stuff than more people owning guns. So there's definitely like, I'm not a person that kind of proponent of you need this ultimate thing to do well.
Yeah.
I think that for the vast majority of the firearms that we use in competition, there's a lot of options out there that are really good and that can do the job. They're super reliable. But there's also the factor of that once you get to a certain skill level, certain performance level, that fine-tuning that thing to you is an important thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of people kind of fall on the side of, I got to fiddle it first and then figure it out how to shoot it at that point versus the other way around of, I have a certain skill level and then I can know that it's doing this or that and then tune it to what I need it to do.
Mm-hmm.
So
for me, I've been shooting a Glock 34 4 years now.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, I shot a Glock 17 for 3 years. So shooting basically the same platform for 7 years, right? And recently, I've kind of got the itch that the pistol might be holding me back. And I've done this with my rifle. I've done this with my shotgun. And I'm kind of one of those people where it's like, I don't want to buy a ton of guns. I would rather buy a ton of shotgun shells or a ton of 223 stuff like that. So I'm kind of bad at holding on to things until it's probably not the right tool for the job.
Yeah.
And then I make that upgrade, and then I forget about messing with that thing until the time comes where I feel like that's holding me back. So
yeah,
if you're totally selfish question, obviously, but if you're in that boat, like how do you know that maybe it's a piece of gear that you need to fix rather than you need to fix your mind?
Well, I think that like there's definitely competitors out there. Like Bob Vogel is a good example. He can rock a Glock at world championship level. But then again, he has honed his skills to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like his grip and his method of managing the recoil on that and the fiddling he does to that to make that gun world championship competitive is required, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that at some point there's always the squirrel factor of, hey, look, there's that new widget or that new thing or whatnot. But there's also the factor of you need to put enough time behind the gun to really understand, is it the limiting factor or is it not?
Mm-hmm.
And I think in most of the gun games that we're playing, it's usually like for practical shooting, for most USPSA matches as a specific example, it's very rare that we're really are the guns or the hardware is required to do like ultra precise stuff. Right. So the guys are like, oh, well, my 1911 shoots, quarter inch at 50 yards. It's like, great. Take that to a bullseye match because you don't need it in USPSA, right? So there's always a give and a take. So for me, I bias my stuff all the way to the side of reliability first.
Mm-hmm.
And then within that reliability realm, then accuracy is second to a degree. I'm not always hammering on I need ultra crazy accuracy, but it has to be accurate enough. And after that, then it's feature function and likes. I like this or I like that feel of it or this kind of thing to help me perform or improve reliability. So, and that's a hard battle for myself to tell you, hey, you got to change your stuff right away, because I always have this evil twin in the back of my head saying, hey, let's try this other thing. Let's try this slide weight or that thing or this spring and that kind of situation, just to fiddle on stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, coming from the RC stuff, there wasn't training like there is in shooting.
Right.
There wasn't a guide to here's how you race cars, or here's how you set up cars, or here's how the spring rates change, how it's the steering works or the traction or that kind of stuff. You had to go out and figure it out yourself.
Right.
And so I definitely have that. I brought that brain into the shooting sports where there's always some kind of skunks works thing going on in my shooting den that I'm fiddling on. It may be something like I've spent a lot of effort and money screwing around with PCCs right now, where I don't even shoot PCC.
Right.
probably won't shoot PCC. But as get me being in the mode of, hey, I'm going to train other people or give other people advice. I don't want to just wing it and say, oh, well, Joe Blow's won this thing with this PCC. That's the best thing. I want to be able to give them an honest answer and say either, hey, I don't know, or here's what I've tested, and here's all the configurations I tested, and out of that, here's the solution that I found that worked best for me. Maybe what works for me best is good for you. Maybe it's not. But I like to be able to give people informed information.
Right.
I think that there's a lot of guys out there in forums or online, this and that are, hey, I'm going to go buy this one brand or widget of thing, and just because I bought that one thing, it's the best thing since sliced bread.
I call that someone's girlfriend. They got to defend her until the death. Yeah. Because that's their decision, right?
Yes. So there's very few people that are going to go out there and say, okay, so I bought this widget, and I'm going to buy all the widgets of the same kind, and I'm going to test every single one of those widgets and spend thousands of dollars and so many hours on proving which ones is actually best.
Yeah.
And then lay it all out there for free, right? There's not many people that are willing to do that.
I mean, shoot, I'd love to do that. Like, that would be a kick in the pants. It'd be something fun to do, but holy shit, can you imagine like the time and money involved in something like that?
Yeah. Well, that's why I don't do social media.
Yeah. Okay, that makes way more sense. I knew how to turn the Facebook on, and you probably shot way more rounds downrange. That makes sense. All right. Well,
so I don't know if that answers your question or not. But.
No, not at all. But it does sound like what it sounds like you're saying is it's probably not the gun, but you can't argue with a guy for wanting to chase something new.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta. We're all distracted by the latest and greatest thing, right?
Sure.
So it's up to you on what you're distracted by. I mean, and it also depends on the shooting sports you're used to. I mean, I'm pretty sure, like I know through my travels and USPSA matches, and like I travel all over the nation for major matches, and the flavor of stages are different all over the country.
Oh yeah.
You can go one place and there's like no targets outside of 7 yards, and then there's other targets where there's 50-yard standards or whatever kind of craziness aiming stuff.
Oh yeah.
And anything in between. So you have to tune your tools to what you're exposed to.
Sure. Well, and that's something we talk about here on the Three Gun Show all the time. Like you and I were talking about before the show, we do a little thing called match recon, which is basically I or a guest will go shoot a match, and we give all the criteria and basically a reconnaissance report of what that match was like. And generally, if the same person is running the match in the same place in the next year, it's going to be similar. Granted, they're going to do new and exciting things, right? But
the flavor is going to be similar.
The flavor is going to be similar. And we actually have a section called match flavor too, which is awesome that you bring that up. Totally validates what I'm doing. But so next weekend I'm going to go shoot a match in just outside of Fort Worth, Texas. It's called the Vortex Shooter Source 3-Gun Championship. And I know last year when I shot it that we shot several pistol shots, 80 yards downhill. And then there was a couple full-size IPSC targets that we're shooting at 100 and 110 yards with our pistol. And so I know that's something I need to practice. And, the match director is one of those social media guys, so he's putting up photos of their match setup and stuff. And I'm like, yep, there's that long pistol shot.
Yep.
So it does get to be something like that where when you're going to a match, like these are the things I can expect because that's the local culture. And like you said, just to build upon that, it's definitely very regional.
Yes.
Yeah. So you at some point you decided to travel and start doing matches. We're going to fast forward a little bit here. And now that you are out there and doing it, like what kind of regional differences do you notice around the country? Can you give us a few examples?
So the kind of the regional differences is it's funny because the stage design is that I've noticed, at least in USPSA matches, is that it's really dependent upon who's responsible for pulling the whole match together. And I don't want to say who the stage designer is because there has to be somebody that's behind the curtain, so to say, that's pulling all the strings. And that string puller person, they're usually smart enough to say, maybe I shouldn't have this guy that always, does club match stages all the time and they're all the same kind of flavor. Maybe I'll find somebody else to do a different stage, or maybe he just gets to do one stage kind of thing. But I think it's it's pretty cool that most match directors for major matches leverage their known resources or local resources to pull together good stage designs. And the thing that it's kind of like the only kind of consistent flavor that I've really seen is the nationals type of stages or shooting challenges at the nationals seem to, and it's kind of weird that USPSA nationals end up being kind of like a different shooting challenge than every other match, which I'm like, this doesn't make sense a little bit, but
yeah, it'd be like UFC instead of they're fighting at the end. Now they're like slap boxing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or maybe they slap
show
box
up to a football game and they're like, no, we're playing tag now.
Yeah. Yeah, flag football now.
Yeah.
Well, this is a national game. Yeah.
But every club has its flavor, and I think that a lot of the flavors are really dependent upon the facilities limitations. The size of their bays, the shooting area, the ground and the structures and that kind of stuff that they can have fun with.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the main things that I really like as a competitor and a match director myself is I like to travel around to different matches to see how people do their thing. Because there's always an interesting, clever way of solving match problems or competitor challenges kind of thing, dealing with like squatting craziness or, stage planning of keeping squads from log jamming on others and that kind of stuff. And that to me I always find that fascinating and finding, the optimal way of doing stuff, not just how do I shoot these stages really well, but how do I compete in that? Because, it'd be like a good example of going to a certain match, and I don't want to call out certain matches directly and put them down, but there could be certain matches that say, hey, here's the schedule. Stage 1 goes from this time to this time, and then stage 2 goes from this time to this time, and you go to that match, and you've gone the last 3 years, and every one is right on time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
In that scenario, you can bank on that almost, and then you could bank on things like I can know that I can set my hydration schedule on their match schedule, or I go to a different match in a different location where a schedule's optional, right? And log jams are happening. And if I'm banking my hydration schedule on how I'm churning through those stages, I could be in trouble because then I'm not hydrating properly. I'm behind schedule and hydrating, get dehydrated. And that's a very simple example of that. But that's one thing where knowing it could be an awesome match and a lot of fun, but it's behind schedule. But going into it knowing that the schedule's optional, I'm going to bank around that and know that I'm going to set an alarm and say that, every half hour I'm going to take a drink.
Oh, okay.
Or that kind of thing. Or something even more rudimentary, like I'm not going to risk trying to fly out or fly back home that night because they're always late.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Dude, I see that a lot with three gunners, so we'll have 2 or 3 day matches that there's 10 stages or something.
Mm-hmm.
And one that I was at recently, they had a medical emergency on the range, non-shooting related, and but to get EMS on the range, they had to shut down all shooting. Right,
Mm-hmm.
so you're down for 45 minutes while they respond and take care of the situation. But that put stuff behind. Right. And then the next day they're trying to make up.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a guy sitting there. I forgot who it was, but it doesn't matter. I probably wouldn't say his name anyway. But there's a guy sitting there at the awards banquet or just before it. And he's like, God, they better get started soon. I've got a flight. And I looked at my watch and I'm like, bro, it's noon. Are you new at this?
Yeah.
Like, geez, man. Like,
yeah.
Like don't make plans until late that night. And I find that with people a lot. Like they really try to cram it in. And I understand it, right? Because like you want to maximize your time on the range.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to try to get that flight out on Sunday so you can go to work and sleep at your desk instead of taking Monday off. Right? And then that gives you one less vacation day you have to burn so you can go to another match later in the year. I totally get that. But have some patience and understand that, you chose that life, right?
Yep. Well, that is important to understand because in my book I talk about distractions. And that's like a lot of people try to associate distractions with like direct association things, like I just shot a no shoot or something that they influence like that immediately. But having that ramble around in the back of your head to think of, oh crap, it's 10:30, my flight's at 2.
Oh yeah.
Am I going to get done? And you're thinking about that, and that chews up mental bandwidth instead of being able to program your stage plan or do other things. And those type of distractions that we think that they're totally not associated with shooting, they do affect your performance. So you kind of have to stack the deck totally in your favor, and not just in the shooting stuff, but the non-shooting stuff, that to enable you to be totally present in there and not distracted while you're at the range trying to perform.
Yeah, it's very true. Man, that's a good point. So I've experienced stuff like that myself. We were talking about it before the podcast here. Like, I do bring equipment with me. I've got remote microphones and everything, and I go to matches. If the IRS is listening, I go to the matches to do podcasts, and I also get to shoot. Mm-hmm. But obviously, I go to the matches and I do podcasts, right?
Yeah.
So, but again, podcast first. That's why I'm there.
Yes.
So, but if I know, like, okay, when we're done shooting here, we're shooting a half day format. Mm-hmm. We're done shooting here. We're done shooting at 2. I'm going to go meet, Steve at the pavilion, and we're going to sit down and record a podcast. Like, that is something in the back of your head that, okay, well, I need to think of good questions. What is Steve good at?
Exactly.
What do I want to know from him, and mm-hmm. that sort of thing. So, yeah, I can totally relate to that, man. It's it's rattling in the back of your head. It may not be a flight or something like that, but I've definitely felt it.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Yeah. So how do you deal with distractions when you're on the range?
So for me, the biggest part of it is mitigation. Really, you have to mitigate as many, like, head off as many distractions as you can. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that comes down to preparation. You got to be prepared for what you're doing. And a lot of the distractions that people will think that are outside of their control are really within their control. It could be gun problems, where they have gun jams, or that same mag is jammed the last 5 matches. Well, you're bringing that bad mag to every match, and it's going to become a distraction. That's in your control. And something as simple as that, or it could be that you want to sleep in another 30 minutes in the morning before the match instead of getting there a little bit more early so you can check out the stages and formulate stage plans and those kind of things. I think that a lot of people are going to the match with and put a higher priority on socialization versus performance. Mm-hmm. And I'm there cutting it up with everybody else, having a good time, but most of the people that know me know when I'm in, I got to check this stuff out mode, and I got to get my ducks in a row, right? And I'll be like, hey, dude, I'll talk to you later. I got to look, figure out this stage right now, kind of thing, And I think that for maximum shooting performance, that's a big thing that separates the top shooters from everybody else.
Right,
is that they have that ability to mitigate distractions and also not allow distractions to completely derail their performance. We're always going to have some kind of circumvention of our performance, and it's really comes down to how much we can handle that, how mm-hmm. much we can screw up and not feel like it's all over. For some people, that's 10 seconds into a stage run and their whole match is done.
Yeah.
And if you think about that from a third person view or a different perspective, you're like, dude, you had a couple misses on a popper or something, and you're allowing that to completely train wreck your whole match. And that's where I think that it's important that a lot of shooters really miss that part. Mm-hmm. Like, they spend a lot of their training on gun handling mechanics and marksmanship skills and those kind of things, but they really come to the match disarmed from that mental game perspective of being able to be mentally tough and handle success and failure and allow all that baggage to stay where it needs to stay, so you're not dragging that baggage from berm to berm mm-hmm. and allowing that to negatively impact your performance.
Is that something that you can practice, like gun handling skills?
Yeah, absolutely. You need to set the same kind of expectations on yourself in every day, mm-hmm. right? The people that have a hard time with setting those kind of expectations, kind of have a lollygag. I'm just going to let things happen all day long, instead of putting strict adherence and saying, I'm going to go do this at this time, and I'm only going to spend this much time on it and get off, or whatever, right? I think that you need to practice those skills on a daily basis, just like you would want to practice any other skill you want to be good at. It'd be like someone wanting to be really good at driving their car, but then avoiding driving a car as much as possible.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Right. So in that case, it's probably repetitions at matches, or maybe repetitions in your practice of maybe making errors and not letting it affect you. Like, how do you program yourself to not let those errors affect the rest of your day, whether it's a practice session or whether it's a match?
Well, I think so you can usually tell when people allow themselves, they promote the derailment of their performance, because there's a lot of internal or external dialogue. We've all seen the shooters. They're shooting a stage, they're doing okay, and then they have a problem, and there's some kind of verbal outburst of some sort of, frustration with their performance. And that verbal outburst, if they have been talking to themselves in their head way before those words come out of their mouth.
Right.
And if you allow yourself to do that, there's no way you can perform something in a subconscious manner. And to perform anything, not just shooting, to perform anything at maximum performance, you need to do it from a subconscious level. It'd be no different than have your keys in your hand and they slip out of your hand and you reactively go and catch them. That is a subconscious action. You're not thinking, I'm going to drop my keys right now and I'm going to catch them in this specific position, that kind of thing. You have to train skills to a subconscious level and allow the latitude to let that happen.
Right.
And it's hard for a lot of type A personality people to let go like that.
Yes.
To practice things to a certain skill level and say, okay, I'm just going to let the autopilot do its thing and let's see how it turns out.
Well, and in your mind, everyone's watching you. Everyone's judging your performance. They're like, oh man, Charlie really bumbled that reload. Maybe not for you, but for like a lower level person, like that is the thought in your head. Like everyone's making fun of me in their mind. This isn't how I perform. They don't know that I'm a great shooter and the world's best and blah blah blah. And that's when you get those verbalizing of the F-bombs being thrown around and stuff like that. But yeah. I've definitely been guilty of that myself. And as you're sitting there talking about that, that's 100% ego, right? Like no one gives a shit, and
exactly,
you shouldn't give a shit. Just fix it and get back in there.
Yeah, a big thing I go over in my book is I try to enforce the kind of the thought process of who's really your competition. And a lot of people will go to a match or a competition of any sort, and they look around the room, right? And they're looking, there's Joe Blow, and there's Frank Rizzo, and these guys won all these other matches, and those are ending up being their competition. Well, if you have that mentality, your performance is rarely going to be better than those people.
Right.
Because that's your bar. I want to be as good as Joe Blow or Frank Rizzo, and Frank Rizzo does this in this certain amount of time or this skill level, and if I get to him, then I could beat him, right? I have a chance to beat him if I can perform on his level. Well, the challenge with that is once you set that bar to that substandard height, it becomes very difficult in beating that person because now you're playing their game. You're limiting your skills to their skill level, and you really cut yourself off from seeing things from a perspective of what is really possible, what is possible in any certain skill. And one way that I stole this 100% from the RC racing world, and it was a super hard lesson to learn that took me years to actually figure out, was that I have to stop racing the other people and I have to start racing the course.
Yes.
It's me versus the course, and I only have control of what the course has in control of me. And I don't have control of what Billy Bob is doing or Frank Rizzo is doing. They could have a race of their life. They could be, having a horrible race of their life. And if I'm always measuring my effectiveness based on their performance, I have to also gauge how well did they do. So it wasn't until I abandoned that thought process of gauging who's attending this race and more of, hey, how can I maximize my performance on the track in these specific corners or jumps or whatever I'm doing in the track, that I really didn't start performing very well, because I stopped looking at what other people were doing and really focused on what I was doing. And I could find things that people weren't seeing because they were too busy racing everybody else instead of racing the track.
Right.
And I stole that mentality from that racing culture into the shooting competition culture. And I look at every stage as me versus the stage. And because that's the only things I have control of. It doesn't matter if the world champion just came down and burned that thing down way faster or better than I could ever do. That doesn't matter, because whatever he does is outside of my control. All I have control of what I can do. So that helps me perform way more consistently, because it's way easier to build a plan and deploy a plan when that plan is based on things that are set in stone. Right. You have your written stage briefing. Here's the requirements of the stage. You have the physical stage that you have to shoot. And those are things that shouldn't change, quote unquote, in a match, which that could be a different discussion. But those things, they shouldn't change. And usually they don't. Right. They're pretty consistent for most people. So those are the things that I really latch onto. And I know that, hey, I can measure my performance against myself versus the stage. And regardless of how I perform on that stage, I could perform the best that I could and still yield a overall poor result against others. But to me, that's a win, because I was able to deploy my skill set within the bounds of my skill set and do what my skill set is able to do. And that's a big thing where competitors are trying to manufacture skill on demand. And that does not happen.
No.
And not in any kind of consistent form.
No.
You know, we can swing for the fences and hope that something happens, and sometimes it does happen, and that gives us hope. Right? but
it's the wrong kind of reinforcement, though. Like it shows you, like, oh, if I just do that again, it could happen like that again.
Exactly. So for a lot of the students that I do training with, and there's always that ego factor that we talked about. And they say, well, I like to use draws as a good example, because everybody knows that we have to draw the pistol before it can go boom. And a lot of people put importance on, well, how fast can you draw the gun to a shot? And I try to hammer it, like somebody will say, oh, well, I can fire a shot and do a 10-yard target in 0.6 of a second. I'm like, okay, let's see you do it 10 times. And he'll do it once or twice, and the rest is missing the target or this or that. And I'm like, well, the reality is that you can't. Can't do it consistently.
Let's see you go do it after resetting for 8 shooters, on maybe a cold, wet day.
Yeah.
Now go do it.
Yeah.
Do it the first time. Do it with no warm-ups. Do it, cold on that buzzer while everyone's out there with you. Like that's the thing that I always, and we talk about that in 3-gun a lot too. In 3-gun, for some reason, there's a lot of people that are against dry firing. They call it, playing with guns in your mom's basement, which, it's kind of fun to joke about. But there's a lot of people that say, like, oh, well, you can do that in the basement, but let's see you go do it on a target while you're, running full sprint, stuffing quad loads into a shotgun,
Yeah. Well, that's where I think that people really misunderstand what dry fire really is. And on other, I've heard other people like to call it dry practice.
Right.
And I like that a lot more than dry fire, because a lot of the skills that we have to hone and perfect have nothing to do with it going boom. So there's a lot of movement skills. There's, gun handling skills. There's transitioning skills that cost us lots of stage time that have nothing to do with actually shooting the gun. And those are skills that, like my dry fire that I do or dry practice that I do is, it's very rarely I'm strapping on my gear and I'm doing the clickety clackety draws and reloads and a bunch of heavy duty gun handling mechanics. Where I'm at in my skill set, I don't need to do that on a very regular basis.
Did you do that at the beginning though?
Of course I did.
Okay.
Of course I did all the wrong, crazy practice as much as everybody else.
Oh, okay. So, but expand on that real quick. So, do you think that is the wrong type of practice?
I think that every adult learner needs a certain amount of repetition to relearn something.
Okay.
And there's two important words there. The first word is really adult learners, because adults learn stuff different than young people.
Right.
And the second important word there is the repetition of things, of how much time do we have to balance or segregate between all the responsibilities we have as adults, right?
Yeah.
And, we all have mortgages to pay and car payments and kids and families and this and that and all these other non-shooting things that we have to do. And we can't be that teenager that's really into practical shooting and he can dry fire for 5 hours a day.
Yeah.
And has no other responsibilities other than doing his homework or maybe mowing the lawn or whatever. But it's important that we make our dry practice training effective within the bounds of those adult realities, of knowing that I only have so much time to do stuff. And I know that I have only so much mental bandwidth or attention to do it. There's way more adult learners that are doing excessive dry practice that's ineffective because they're mentally disengaged, thinking about all the other stuff that they have to get done in life.
Oh, yeah.
And they believe that if I do these mindless motions of these draws or reloads or whatever that repetitive thing is they're doing, that the repetition in itself is going to magically make it better, which it's...
And it doesn't?
It usually does not, because
okay.
You're practicing repetitions of... You're practicing things to not perfection, to permanent, right? You're practicing actions to a permanent level. Like I have my water here, and if I always place my water here and I'm grabbing at it 50 times a day, I'm going to get really good at grabbing at this water here, right here. Mm-hmm. But what happens when my wife says, "Oh, here's your water over here," right? And I'm going to go, "Oh crap, my water's over here." Now I got to change this up, and I've done that practice enough that maybe my water should be here. But in the match, it ends up in somewhere else, right? And that's a pretty generic or rough example of that. But there's a lot of practice happening in the practical shooting sports where people are practicing stuff that has very low match value. Like a draw or a reload. Those things are usually happening when we're doing other stuff, when we're running into a first shooting position or we're running between shooting positions. Those things are where we have that buffer to take a while to get that stuff done. Mm-hmm. Now, I always like to profess that or cage that with, I'm not promoting you don't have to know how to draw the gun well or you don't know how to reload well. You need to do those skills well. You need to practice those. And so for some people, that takes a crap ton of practice to do it well. And we're all unique human beings, and we take a different level of repetition to do that. But the challenge with that is that you need to balance that with what other things am I screwing up in a match that are costing me real time or real amounts of performance.
Right.
And that's where I think that my book really goes around that, is tries to help the students objectively assess what they're doing and formulate a training plan around the skills that cost them the most in a match performance.
Well, so you've talked about this a little bit. I'm going to hold this up for the camera here. The book is called A Path-Focused Effort, and the subtitle is A Learning Guide for Practical Shooting. Couldn't read that one in the camera, but Charlie Perez is the author, of course, and I just noticed you're wearing the same shirt.
I know.
Did you
thought
do that?
About that when I was driving over here? I'm like, holy cow, I'm wearing the same shirt.
Did you do that so I would recognize you?
Actually, I didn't. Stage plan wasn't that deep.
No, I like it. But so I'm getting into this book. I'm a much slower reader than I would like, or maybe I just don't make the priority for reading. But man, I gotta say I'm really digging this one. Because I kind of feel like you're someone that I've met in the past, and I don't know if you remember me, but 2014, I was second place unclassified production Mile High Showdown.
There you
You
go.
probably remember me because of that. But no, I'm just kidding. But you're a guy that a lot of people in the Colorado shooting community look up to, and so I'm pumped to get deeper into the book here. But I was blown away by the beginning of the book, Charlie. Like from the introduction, the preface. This is not the direction that a lot of people go, right? Like over on my bookshelf over here. No, that one's over by. Apparently, I took that one home. I've got the Brian Enos book, right? Mm-hmm. So he starts like super esoteric and like way out there in like these shooting concepts. And your book starts with setting realistic expectations and reminding the reader that, hey, this is a hobby, and have fun with it, be safe, and setting those like realistic expectations that you said, like adults should have, right? So we're not going to be superstars. We're not going to be on the cover of Wheaties, unless we do our outreach program we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, there we go.
But I just thought that was like a unique way to start the book, and it puts the reader in a mindset that's completely different from many other shooting books that I've read. Why did you choose to start that way? And is that like a reminder to yourself based on your experience in the RC area?
I really wanted to set that expectation up front to basically say, hey, here's a instruction manual that's based around adult learners that are playing this game as a hobby, that also want to maximize their performance within the bounds of those restrictions.
Right.
And there's a lot of products out there, books and DVDs and that kind of stuff, that are like the whole hog on, oh, you're going to be a world champion and you win the nationals and that kind of stuff. And those are totally, good goals to have. I want to win the Powerball too. But there's the reality of,
I can teach you how.
Yeah, here's the Powerball. Just give me 200 million, and so that's the challenge around that. I think it's important to set that up front, to say, hey, no matter how much you really want to have that 0.8 draw, you still got to pay your bills.
Right.
You still got to show up for work, and I'm yet to attend any match where the winner was pulling away in a yacht, or, they have briefcases of money given to them. And the reality is that this is a game that's for hobbyists, and some people may get offended by that even at the world championship level, people aren't getting paid millions, right? This isn't a pro bowl or ball game sport, right? If this was a game where people could go and make millions doing it, it would be a totally different sport.
Yeah, for sure.
And I mean, that's a different discussion in itself, but that's why I wanted to set that stage up front in the front of my book to say, hey, here's the concepts from a person that is, I'd like to say I'm pretty grounded, and I'm pretty realistic around what my maximum performance level is in this shooting sports, but I'm always going to make having fun with it a higher priority than the performance of it.
Right.
Because once those get reversed and now performance is way more important than fun, I'm not going to want to do it, because now it's a job.
Right. And that's what we were talking about with the RC racing earlier, right?
Yeah.
Now, do you think that you needed that experience in RC racing to do what you do in competitive shooting now? Do you think you would?
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
it grounds you in the fact that this is only a hobby.
Yes. And the thing that I think is really awesome about this hobby is that we are still small enough that I can put in a concerted amount of effort to get good, and I feel that I'm competitive at a national level, and I can get on the super squads at the major matches, and I can rub shoulders and shoot with world champions, and these are the best performers. They're putting in Olympic level effort to hone their skills, and it's amazing to see them perform their craft. And you're not going to have that with other normal sports.
Right.
Right. You're not going to go to your local golf course and have a round with Tiger Woods.
Right.
That's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. So I think that that's one thing that's really awesome about the shooting sports, at least today, maybe that's going to change in the future if it blows up and people love guns everywhere and everybody's nice, right? But I think that that's something that we really need to embrace. It's pretty sweet to have the ability to rub shoulders with the best of the world and go to a match that's relatively cheap, entertainment. It really is.
Yeah. Yeah. If you think of the so what is a major USPSA match? Major 3-gun match is like $250 to $350.
Now, usually major matches like area level matches, that kind of stuff are between like $100 to like maybe $200.
Really?
Yeah.
Jeez, that's cheap.
Yes.
I need to get in one of these 1-gun sports.
Yeah, because we're only doing one gun.
No kidding. All right. So wow, it seems like a bargain now. So $100 to $200. And then what's the round count for the weekend?
Most majors are between 250 to 350 rounds.
Okay. Yeah, I mean that's entirely within the realm of like the average person that has, that's living low to middle class, right?
Well, absolutely. You're spending 3 or 4 times that to go up, a local person to go up and go ski.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. So the reason I don't ski is because of that. Like when we were young, so I'm from Denver as well. When we were young, we didn't have a lot of money, right? So skiing was for rich people. And now that I'm an adult and I choose where the money goes, like I don't need another expensive hobby.
Yeah.
But then I started shooting 3 guns, so it definitely is cost prohibitive to do something like that. But yeah, for one day, and that's coming back home and sleeping in your own bed, So yeah, when you talk about traveling for a major match, it is relatively cheap in those sort of things.
Yeah.
But then you get into the the topics of training and things like that and progressing to get better. So let's talk about like some of the you got a little smirk on your face when I said that.
Go ahead.
Let's talk about some of the low hanging fruit for pistol skills. Like the audience of the 3-gun show here is generally 3-gunners, but a lot of guys dabble in the pistol sports as well. And a lot of us plainly suck at pistol. So and we try to make up for that in other areas. So what's like some low hanging fruit and maybe some things that you see as a pistol shooter that 3-gunners are doing incorrectly?
So from a 3-gun perspective, I can only really say it from a voyeur perspective of watching 3-gun matches.
Sure.
Locally.
Have you ever participated in a 3-gun match?
I have not participated in a 3-gun match, but I have seen several of the 3-gun matches happen out the Ben Lomond Gun Club or out at CRC or whatnot. And I actually RO'd the Area 2 3-gun match that was held at CRC a few years back.
Oh yeah,
the
Colorado Noveski Multi-Gun Championship.
And seeing that kind of stuff, as a general, like, I don't know if it's pistol specific, but it seems like from a general, the biggest cut or the lowest, I like to say, these games are death by 1,000 little cuts.
Yeah.
But the biggest cut would be just the general lack of sense of urgency in doing anything.
Oh, okay.
Like I can watch, like, and there's, for whatever reason, I end up going out and practicing at the Ben Lomond range when there's a 3-gun match going on, and being curious, I'll watch, a few shooters shoot the stages, and there's a lot of moseying around and dilly-dallying on the clock when if they just ran when they needed to run or did stuff urgently when they had to get, bullets in the gun or that kind of stuff, then that would save lots of time on their stage runs.
All right.
There just seems like to be a general lackadaisical, let me mosey around the stage and kind of meander here and there kind of movement that's happening. And, to me, I always look at that and I'm like, wow, if I looked at nothing but the movement stuff, that, that shooter could have saved 10 or 15 seconds on that stage just by moving with some kind of urgency.
Right.
So, and maybe you tell me, what is the deal with that?
Well, so as you were talking about that, I was trying to think, like, what could the reason possibly be for it? And, maybe it's one of those things where you're watching a club match. So maybe you're watching lower level shooters that are doing it. it could also be that so I think in like the context of shotgun specifically, people can only move as fast as they load.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times
I've definitely seen that.
so a lot of times people move super slow because they can't get the damn shells in the gun.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's definitely part of it with
so I mean, why? Maybe this is a super novice question on my
Sure.
part, but if I'm a shooter, a shotgun, 3-gun shooter, and I'm shooting my shotgun, and I know I suck at putting shells in there in an urgent manner, why wouldn't I at least run like I really had to run to the next position, and then stationary, just put in the rounds or the shells as needed, instead of turning the whole thing into this turtle mosey weirdness?
So that's an interesting question. So I would say that as someone who's spent a lot of time in the sport, I often hear it said like, make sure that when you're loading your shotgun, you're moving, and that can be taken many ways, right? So it probably does end up being the turtle mosey a lot of times. If you can sprint and load your shotgun, that's the ideal, right? But let me answer that question with a question. So if you have the same situation with someone who's shooting production and they run into a position, drop a magazine, put in a new magazine, and shoot that array, and then do that for every single array, what's the first piece of advice you're going to give them?
Load on the move.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe.
But that's actually a good analogy, because there's a lot of, like, when I train people that are shooting low capacity divisions and they're doing a lot of loads, they run into that mode of my movement is going to be dictated by the speed of my reload. So they're like, I don't want to be doing a standing reload in the next position, so I'm going to move like a turtle until it's done, and then I'm not doing a standing reload. And for those guys, I tell them, hey, I would rather haul ass and get there and be finishing the load stationary,
right,
rather than have some weird mosey thing going on that I'm basically creating more time just because I'm trying to get this really slow load done.
So do you think that there, we can do, I've got a bunch of dummy shells over there and I got my shotgun in the truck. We can do this after the podcast here, and I've got a timer. We can figure out what's the fastest. We can run down the halls, be crazy. Hopefully everyone's cleared out by then, but we can figure out which one's faster, like sprint into position and do a standing reload. But you might be onto something there. I don't know. I think
just gonna put it on a timer and see what happens.
Yeah, for sure. We've got
I think that the turtle only promotes more turtle.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and then that's a good point, because now that is your metric for speed. So even when you dump that shotgun and you move on to your pistol, now you're still maintaining that turtle speed. That's a very good point.
So that's my general observation. Like maybe another example would be the that Area 2 match that I RO'd, and actually I RO'd that match because Mark Pasamanik made me do it. But
I remember seeing you there and thinking, like, I bet he didn't shoot this match.
No. But the stage I had was an interesting stage where it was on 2 separate berms.
Yes.
And so one berm was rifle stuff. So you shot a bunch of paper targets on the rifle, dumped it, and then run between berms, shot some pistol stuff back and forth, and then finished in the back of the bay with some shotgun stuff.
Right.
And I RO'd, and me being a pillar of physical awesomeness, I RO'd the vast majority of people there running across those berms. And the biggest thing that I noticed is that, I'm a self-professed fat ass myself, and I was like almost running over these shooters that have nothing else to do but run.
Right.
And that just was really astounding to me. And in my own observation of that match, it's like, man, there was only maybe 3 dudes that actually ran like they had to run. Like, I'm running from the cops. Like, I got to get it going. And that was really an eye-opener for me in that aspect of it. Like, there was, I would say that 97, 98% of the shooters that shot that stage gave away at least 3 or 4 seconds on that stage just because they didn't run. And that's, I mean, that happens not just in 3-gun, but in pistol matches too.
Sure.
I mean, there's that weird half jog, not quite run movement thing that happens.
That's a weird one. It's I like to call it the tactical prance. Because like you've got a gun,
really
so it's tactical, right?
Yeah.
But I see dudes do it a lot with rifles. Like running with a rifle is not as hard as you think it would be. And granted, we've been told for our entire lives not to run with sticks and shit like that. But man, for some reason, when people get a rifle in their hand, like they do the tactical prance. They just kind of bunny hop from position to position. And yeah, I totally get that. I've seen that quite a bit. And, in Colorado, we have, nothing but bays. We don't have like open terrain or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I wonder if we get programmed in our head, like, well, it's a 8-yard movement over there. So I'll just prance instead of, taking 2 big leaping steps or whatever,
Yeah. Well, that's one thing that, the guys that shoot with me regularly, like if there's a shooting position run from one to the next, and then I have to really get after it, I usually have a grunt or a rah as I'm running to the next position. And I'm not doing that because it's fun or some Showtime thing. I'm doing that because I'm putting every ounce of my effort into hauling my svelte self from one place to the next.
It's like tennis.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, when they swing the racket, it's always yeah. And I've noticed that with a lot of the top shooters in our game. Like I remember specifically, I was watching a GoPro video of a guy doing a shoot house at 3-Gun Nation Nationals. It was 2016. And I remember that as he's running, he's going, and I remember thinking like, I wasn't breathing that hard. I know I wasn't breathing that hard when I was going through there.
Yeah.
And I noticed it immediately after that at Blue Ridge 3-Gun in Rockcastle Shooting Center in Kentucky. Dan Horner was on a stage and he was running from a position to a position while loading his shotgun, and he was doing the same thing. And I thought, like, oh, these guys are like really getting after it. Yeah.
And it's not like Daniel Horner is not fit.
No.
Right?
No. Yeah. But yeah, that's what I'm saying. So the other guy was the same way. Like he's a fit dude, and someone, you look at him and you think like, oh, he's probably a runner. Right. So it's that type of mentality, right, of taking it like seriously as a sport.
Yes.
So do you have like any sort of physical conditioning thing that you do yourself, or do you just turn it up for the match, or what?
For me, what I like to do, like in my dry practice, is I like to really hone launching out of positions with the least amount of footwork possible, like preloading my trailing leg so I can just push out of the positions with a trailing leg push. I like to promote that, and also hone braking in the next position with a solid brake of 1 foot instead of like these rabbit steps and a bunch of little shuffling steps getting into positions.
So you don't like the rabbit steps? I see that actually taught.
The rabbit steps, that's more kind of like of a style scenario, and that's where I talk about that in the book, where there's different styles of shooting, and I'm really not a big fan of saying, here's the way, and if you don't do the way, you're lost.
Right.
It's really not. I mean, there's many different ways of getting the same thing done, and there's many different skill sets and deploying them different ways that effectively get stuff done. And it really comes down to every person putting in the practice effort to prove to themselves which way is more effective and which way is more effective 10 times out of 10. And for me, for my shooting style, my style is primarily like run aggressively into positions, stand in a solid stance, and then hammer out the rounds in aggressive pace, and then haul ass to the next position kind of thing. So I like to call that stand and blast type of style. And for that style, for me to transition the gun aggressively and to shoot very aggressively, I can't be shuffling around. Anytime I'm shuffling the feet, I can shoot, but my bullets ain't going where they're supposed to go. So it usually causes a interruption in the shooting while I'm moving my feet around.
So you're not like a proponent of shooting on the move. You're more of a stand and deliver kind of guy?
I'm a stand and deliver kind of guy, but in any kind of shooting sports at the top of the game, you can't be 100% biased one way or the other. If if there's no competitive advantage to shooting something on the move versus stand and blast, I'm going to do stand and blast because that is my style. Now, there are times where the best, like competition strategy wise, is to shoot arrays of targets on the move. Then absolutely, I'm shooting those things on the move. But that's where you need to really be able to know and put in that effort in practice to set up all those different scenarios and prove to yourself, okay, I'm going to stand and deliver, and I'm going to shoot on the move and do it back and forth and do it 10 times each way and figure out, well, which way really was better, which way was more consistent. And that allows you to make those proper strategy decisions in a match to know going into it, not be deciding, well, Joe did that. He shot it on the move, so now I got to shoot on the move.
Right.
Now you're shooting Joe's game. You're not shooting your game. So
yeah, and then you're also, like you said earlier, trying to create skills at a match rather than just going with what skills you already have.
Yes, and I like to call those like the hard experience learning lessons. Where you see somebody deploy skill set or something that you haven't done, and you don't want to risk doing that in the match. I put that in my notebook and I say, hey, I'm setting that thing up in practice the next time I go out there, and I'm going to set that up and figure it out. Is that something that I should be doing or could do, and really vet it to know, is that something that he was just doing a one-off thing, or is that, that home run that it hooked up and it worked for him that one time, or is that really something that could be deployed on a regular basis?
Right.
But that's the thing that kind of blows my mind about people, that they invest a lot of time, invest a lot of money on trying to get better, but then they don't practice smart. They don't keep a list of things that they know are kicking their butt, or they've seen shooting challenges in matches or stages that really gave them a hard time, and they don't set that stuff up in practice to figure out, well, which is the best way to tackle those challenges.
Well, you just mentioned putting that in your notebook. Now, is that like a method of letting go? Like we were talking about earlier, of letting go of maybe
absolutely.
You had a challenge,
as a distraction.
Yeah, you had a distraction that was a challenge. You couldn't rise to the occasion. Write that down, and now it's like, hey, I'm going to deal with that when I get home.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've talked about match prep. We talked about maybe some low hanging fruit that us three gunners need to work on, stuff like that. Let's talk about dry practice and live practice. Now, when you going into your den, your dojo, and you're doing your dry practice and you then go out to live practice, is it going to be the same drill you're working on?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And like I don't like to, like, if I am live firing something, let's say that I'm live firing a draw to a target at whatever distance and the time is a second. And I prove that over and over. It's a second, a second, a second, a second. Maybe it's varying a tenth here or there, right? But it's a second. If I go back home and I'm dry firing or dry practicing that, and now it's magically something else, now it's 0.8 or 0.9 or something that's dramatically different, I know that I'm doing something wrong. I'm not, and a lot of people associate that with, hey, I'm doing something better, I can do it faster. Well, you're really doing something wrong because you're circumventing a requirement to achieve that different time,
right,
or that faster time,
right.
A lot of association with that is a lot of people will dry fire things usually a tenth or two faster than they could live fire it. And for a lot of people, that's a big proponent of that is they're not seeing the sights enough. And that's an enigma world of what is really enough.
Right.
But, and the other factor is that they're not gripping the gun with the same pressure as needed to manage recoil.
Yeah. Cause it's not going kaboom.
Yeah,
and
it's not going to go kaboom.
Nothing's happening.
And for me, when I was coming up through the game, a huge light bulb went on when I told myself, hey, why am I having this big divergence in time between my dry fire times and my live fire times? And I started to break down, well, what am I really doing in dry fire? And then I do it in live fire. And it was this huge light bulb moment that went on that said, man, I'm not gripping the gun with the same pressure in dry fire. And that's allowing me to do sloppier trigger pulls. Things happen a little bit faster because I'm not. And when I'd go into live fire, it's like, oh, well, now I have to grip the gun hard.
Right.
And it's this conscious decision that has to happen. And when we decide to do things, it takes longer to do.
Right.
And at that point, when I made a concerted effort to say, hey, anytime a gun is between my face and a target, whether that's dry or live or whatever, it's going to have the same grip pressure as it's going to go boom. That's when I really started to see a very small divergence between my dry fire times and my live fire times.
Mm-hmm.
And that's for, that's just for gun handling stuff. But I think that a bigger proponent is how many people go out and practice and they set a drill and they dry fire that whole drill like a mini stage, and they figure out what that dry fire time is. And then they live fire it once and compare that. That is huge, because for a lot of the practical shooting sports, you get, I don't want to say unlimited or amount of time to look at stages, but you have an exceptional amount of time to look at stages and break them down and dry fire them or dry practice them.
Write notes,
figure things out. Right?
Videotape stuff now.
Mm-hmm. And for that is your opportunity where you need to make that practice where the rubber meets the road, and that's how the reality is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're like the next time you go to a match, look at your buddy and watch him dry fire a stage and time him. And time him unbeknownst to him. Time them on how that dry fire run on the stage. Just tell them, hey, dude, let's dry fire this whole stage and figure out our times. And do that, and then at the match, look at the results and look at the dry fire times. And for most people, their dry fire time of the stage is going to be dramatically faster than their live fire. And if you're dry firing a stage that is 30, 40, 50% faster than you're really going to shoot it, how good of a practice is that?
Yeah.
It's not good.
That's a good point. So is that the same but different when you see people walking through a stage and dry firing and maybe not hitting those positions? They're just kind of basically pointing their finger at targets?
Yep, they're meandering around.
Yeah.
Now, that really comes down to their skill level, right? And for the top shooters in the world, when they're all in the super squad, one of the only things that they really can hold against someone else is their strategy. So that could be a little bit of mental trickery around, hey, I'm not going to dry fire this section of the stage or this whole stage at real pace because I'm tipping my hand on how I'm going to do my footwork through this area or engagement of targets or whatnot. Now that's like way off in the weeds,
dude,
right?
Totally.
But the reality is that if you, when people ask me, well, how are you able to shoot that stage at maximum performance on your one performance? And the answer is that wasn't my one performance. That was my 50th run or my 20th run, because I dry fired it properly. And I physically dry fired the stage at a realistic pace, and then it allows me to mentally dry fire it at a realistic pace. That way, when it actually goes boom, that's not a unique thing. That's not this special weird thing that happens after a buzzer goes off. That's happened 20 times or 50 times or whatever that magical number is of the rehearsals that you have of that event. And that's where I think a lot of shooters, they would do themselves a big service, is if they made their dry fire of stages and matches at a way more realistic pace than what they're doing today. And that, like in my classes, it's funny because we go through this process of, I let them dry fire the stage at their crazy fast pace, and I said, okay, let's start over. And for every target, I want you to give it a quarter second split, out loud, to basically go boom, boom. So for every target you point your fingers at, go boom, 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 boom. And if you do that, that is going to slow everything down to a much closer realistic pace that it's going to happen. And it usually starts out as a boom, 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 boom. And that's a hard process for them to deploy effectively through the whole stage run when they're practicing the stage. But once they realize that they're doing that, they understand that if they were to live fire it after that, if they put in that effort in dry firing that practice session enough before they get their boom booms down to a realistic pace, that when they live fire it, their performance is much more consistent, much easier to deploy, way less distracting, because you don't have these other variables that they're generating manufacturing distractions because they dry fire the stage at the wrong pace.
Interesting.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So then your brain doesn't have the trouble reconciling the difference between what you've been rehearsing for the last 20 minutes and what you're doing now.
Yes. And that requires that we need to be mentally stringent in rehearsing things, which is as adults, we really don't have to do that very often.
No.
Right? We're in wing it mode, just like right now. We're kind of just winging it, right?
Yeah, pretty
we
much.
Didn't practice this.
Right.
So
you didn't practice this? I've been practicing all day.
I didn't. I couldn't even remember what I had for lunch, right?
It's true.
So I don't want to diverge off the topic too much, but
No,
to get back to your suggestion for three gunners is that I think that a big pistol problem with three gunners is that since for a lot of three gun matches it's 2 anywhere on paper equals a neutralized target, they really sacrifice the ability to call their shots.
Yes.
And they're just slinging lead in the general vicinity of a target instead of earning their hits.
Yeah.
And there was a practice session that I had with Michael Payne and Mike Griswold, and there as once again out in Ben Lomond, and they were practicing rifle pistol stage. And I came over and I said, "Hey man, can I shoot it just with my pistol?" Because I like shooting stuff, and it was kind of a complex stage that had some distance stuff, so you had to like earn your hits. And those guys are really struggling with getting their hits because they're like double tapping at stuff, and they weren't really aiming hard when they had to. And I shot the stage, and I had pretty good hits through it. And I told Mike Payne, I said, it doesn't take any longer to shoot 2 A's.
Yeah.
It doesn't. And knowing that, and I was trying to like get that across to him to say, hey, if you have 2 A's and you called both of those shots good, that's no longer a distraction in your mind, right? And if you know that you can shoot A's at that distance, in a lot of the three gun sports, like 1A is a neutralization, right?
Right.
Maybe that opens up the opportunity for different strategy, right? If you know that you have the skill and the visual patience to shoot an only 1A when you have to, and that opens up an opportunity to do something else in the stage that nobody else is doing because they're just cranking out 2 rounds at every target. I think that there's some of that left on the table for those guys.
Right.
That calling the shot is really the factor of being able to do the next thing as soon as possible. And that's really what they're sacrificing. If you're just pointing the gun at a target and rolling your finger twice, you're usually waiting for a timing of the cycling of the gun to complete before you drive the gun off the target. Well, if you're calling your shots, you can start driving the gun off the target as soon as you call that shot good.
Right.
And that allows you to do the next thing, whatever that be. Could be loading your gun or engaging the next target or running or whatever. But I think that is something that if the three gun shooters really embraced, that would help them improve their performance. Because in the end, your score stops when the time stops, right?
Right.
And we're always trying to do stuff as soon as possible, get the time down as much as possible. Well, if you earn your hits by calling your shots, it allows you to do the next thing as soon as possible. It doesn't take any longer to shoot A's versus 2 random hits anywhere, right? So earn your hits. Maybe that's the most generic way is earn your hits on those targets.
Nice. Charlie, one of my biggest complaints about three gun, even at the club level, is we never look where our hits were. And you'll get done with the stage and you'll turn around and all the targets are already pasted. And I remember my first USPSA club match outside of where I first started shooting over at Lockheed. And everyone was standing at the targets waiting for me to go look at them with the scorekeeper. And I was like, oh, this is great. It's like, they're all D's and shit. But it's like, oh, this isn't 2 anywhere. My bad.
You should have just pasted those.
Yeah, exactly. But that was an eye opener. And then I only spent a couple years shooting USPSA and three gun at the same time until I just kind of devoted most of my time to three gun. But I remember that you could look at the target and say, yes, I remember placing that shot there and, having that explained to me by a mutual friend, Ben Go, as, that's shot calling. That's what shot calling is, and having that whole term explained and everything. And in three gun, the only shot calling that you do or you get confirmation of is in your practice, because there's never a time where you turn around and they show you something like, oh, here's your hits. So I think because of how much steel we shoot in major matches and how difficult those like knockdown targets are, like people want to get better at shooting steel. So that's a lot of practice videos that you see. Of three gunners.
Yeah,
is people shooting a lot of steel. And if you look in matches of the lower to mid level shooter, it's always like tap 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 on the paper, and then when it comes to the steel, it's ding,
Yeah.
And I've been guilty of that one myself in the past for sure. But it's those paper confidence builders, because you can just basically point in the general direction, squeeze it twice like a gangbanger, and you're gonna have a good day. But once you get to the 6-inch steel target sitting there, at 13, 18 yards, whatever, then all of a sudden you're talking about a necessity to actually use your marksmanship skills.
Well, so here I challenge you to this, and I actually use this for myself when I came from the shooting school of let's go really fast and hits are optional. So my arc of learning really came to, hey, let me get some hits, learn how to call my shots and be patient and pull the trigger without displacing the sights and that kind of stuff. And I went through a phase of I ran into that at local matches as well, where the targets are getting pasted. I don't know where my hits are. I could see on the score, like, oh, I had this many Charlies, or Deltas or Mikes or whatever. But I didn't know where they were. And so I started asking my squad mates and saying, hey, only tape the A's and I'll tape everything else. So then I would have to go after my run, and I would have to tape all the Charlies and the Deltas. So I knew on specific targets where my non-A's were. And that really helped me understand, get a better perspective of, instead of, oh, I had 6 Charlies, I had a Charlie on here, and it was because of this. And I had a Charlie on there or a Delta on this because of this certain scenario, where I remembered, oh, well, I only seen the sights once, or whatever, right? So maybe that's something you could do with your next club match and say, hey, for all the non-A's, let me tape them.
Yeah, it's actually not a bad idea. I don't know how that would work though, man. Like the reset is so elaborate on some of these stages. You just have to be fast, I guess.
Yeah, then you can show them how to run.
Yeah,
so just run between all the targets.
There you go. Get your exercise going as well.
Yep. So sorry, I didn't want to derail you on your next question that you asked me.
No, it's all good. I don't even remember what the question was now, but the book is a path of focused effort. Charlie, where can we get the book? I have one here myself, so I know the answer to that question, but for the audience listening. So
I have a website. It's called Big Panda Performance. So it's www.bigpandaperformance.com. And on there, I sell my book. And, you can also contact me there for training and that kind of stuff.
Cool. What kind of training do you offer?
So I basically offer pistol training, competition pistol training stuff. I don't do any CCW kind of stuff. There's a million guys out there doing that kind of thing. I pretty much focus on just competition training. And since I have a normal day job, training isn't my full-time job. So I basically maintain an email list of future class students. So if you're interested in any kind of training, you just shoot me an email or contact me on the website there, and I'll add you to that list, and then we'll do a class when there's enough people.
Very cool.
So that's how I pull it together.
Awesome. And so the book, this is the second edition I saw, right? That was printed in March. Is that what I saw?
So yeah. So
how long has this been out then? Because I just became aware of it a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I released it in February, and then it's one of those things where I tried to have a bunch of people pre-review it before I released it.
Right.
And having a bunch of different aspects of reading it and understanding the word structures of things and whatnot. And I've worked on that thing for 2 years, and it's one of those deals where you can only read the same thing so many times.
Yeah.
With your brain is like making up the words.
You're filling in the holes and stuff like that.
Exactly.
I do that too.
So, at some point I just had to draw a line in the sand and say, hey, man, I just got to get this thing out here and get it released. And that's the first release was in February. And so I sold books, and then people gave me feedback, said, hey, you got this spelled wrong or missing this or that in there. And a lot of it was just like kind of like grammatical stuff and little things so I'm very appreciative of this. That's 100% made by me.
Mm-hmm.
I get them printed, I bind them myself, I went through the whole thing and that kind of situation. And, so the second edition of it, there's really no secret sauce added to it. It's really just the fixing of those grammatical things.
Oh, I gotcha.
So that's, so that was happened in March when I basically made those changes and then deployed that version of it.
Very cool. Well, our buddy Mike Griswold showed me this book when I was out on the range, and once I finally remembered, I quickly went and Googled Charlie Perez book, and Big Panda Performance came up. So
cool.
I'm pumped to completely get into this. And what's the promise of the book? By the time I'm through with this, I'm going to be superstar USPSA shooter.
Everybody's got their own little promises, right?
Right. So what's yours?
I make no claims of performance improvement other than keeping an open mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the biggest, like, for other people have really asked me, I don't want to say called me out or whatever, but they say, what's different about your book than all the other books that are out there?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the two main things that differentiate my book to others is that I go through a lot of effort on explaining the why.
Mm-hmm.
Why certain skills are performed in certain ways, and examples of here's why it happens this way and why it doesn't happen other ways. So I think that's a big thing. There's a lot of books out there that are kind of like monkey see, monkey do. Here's how I do it. Have fun figuring
doctrine,
it out.
Right?
Yes. And so I think that's a big part of it. And I really try to avoid any kind of doctrine, down from the mountain. Here's how you do it. It's more of here's how I do it. Here's a couple different ways of how you can do it. And here's why certain ways happen in certain functions or manners. And it's really up to you as a learner to test the stuff out yourself and figure it out and do it. Because really the primary tenet of this book is teaching adult learners how to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This book is not, I'm not giving you a fish. I'm teaching you how to fish.
Right.
So that's the other factor of the book that really separates others is there's not a lot of books out there that will go out on a limb and say, hey, these skills or these things are causing the most amount of match performance loss. And the way that I help the learner understand how to objectively assess their skills, formulate a list of things that they're performing during a match,
mm-hmm.
and then organize or put them in a match value perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And then, hey, let's train and practice these things that have the high match value, like running when we need to run, right? Versus doing 8 million draws, right? In a normal USPSA club match, there's 5 draws.
Right.
And 3 of those don't count because we run 2 or 3 steps to the first shooting position. So all those draws are equal to like maybe 2 or 3 tenths of advantage on somebody else in a whole match, right? Whereas if you just start running when you need to run, that could equal 10 or 15 seconds advantage against somebody else in a match. And that's the thing that I try to explain in the book in a way that in manner to say, hey, let's look at this stuff from a perspective of what's really causing me my match performance loss.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the things, for a lot of people, it's not the things they think it is, but it's other things. And a big piece of it is that people are in this highly technical, everybody's got a smartphone, everybody's videoing their stage runs, that kind of stuff. And it's unfortunate because a lot of those people are doing that for fashion or entertainment.
Hey, come on.
Look at my buddy shoot this stage. Those splits were crazy, right? But you can't see the holes in the targets, right?
Right. I specifically aim the camera so you can't see the holes in the target.
But there's not a lot of people that really use that footage for objective, honest assessment of their performance.
Right.
And pick certain things out of that video. Like I tell a lot of people, hey, turn the volume off. Right? If you want to look and understand how your movement is working, turn the volume off and cover your upper body. Look at just your feet during that video. What are your feet doing in all those positions? Right? Break it down that way and cut it up into smaller chunks and skill chunks so you know what things are costing you what time.
Huh.
So hopefully that helps people out.
Interesting.
And I wish I could say that, yes, you buy my book and on page 38 is the
that's the
special
secret sauce.
sauce.
I'm going to look there right after this.
So there's, it's no different than anything else, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're only going to get out of stuff what you put into it, right? And there's no magic pill. There's a lot of hard work. It comes into performing well, and we need to use whatever tools we can have to improve our performance. And I like to tell people, hey, if your kid was struggling in school or a certain subject in school, you would help assist them directly, or if you don't have the skills to do it, you'd get somebody to help you with that.
Right.
Get them a tutor or get them special stuff to work on, that kind of thing. It's no different in the shooting sports. We all need tools to get better. There's a lot of guys that say, oh, I'm a self-taught shooter. And I kind of say bullshit to that, because those guys aren't stuck in a cave somewhere with no internet, no books, no any kind of reference, right? Those guys were putting in a metric shit ton of research and learning to figure that stuff out, and whatever assistance they found in doing that. For me, I like to help people and train, and I like to take training myself.
Right.
Because the learning process never stops.
I tell you, I've found so much value in the knowledge of other people in my life. And I think two things, shooting and weightlifting, made me realize that, that there's so much value in paying for that value. It will save you so much in the end, and the stuff that I've learned through the show has been awesome. But man, there's 200 hours of episodes. So you could go and listen to all 200 hours of that, and, you'd be a good shooter for sure if you put all that shit into practice from all those people.
Oh yeah.
Or you can buy like a book that is distilled down of every little bit of knowledge that Charlie's ever bled out on the sand of the shooting berms.
Well, I can honestly say that if I had that book when I first started in 2008, it would have saved me at least 2 or 3 years, and who knows how much ammo.
Oh yeah.
And just learning lessons. And the breadth of the book is not just about shooting, right? It's about mental management and strategy and training and everything combined. Because it's not just one aspect. A lot of people get super focused on, it's the shooting, or one little piece of
slinging
it.
rounds downrange.
So I hope it helps other people. And that's really why I made it. And if I can leave my little mark on the shooting sports, and when I'm done with this hobby and my knees don't work anymore or whatever else, I can say, hey, I hope that this book has helped other people reduce their learning curve time.
Yeah.
Right. And help them enjoy the sport.
Awesome. Well, good goals. Charlie, wish you the best with it. Path of Focused Effort is the book that we're talking about. BigPandaPerformance.com is where you can find the book. Oh, you know what? People are going to ask me this. Where'd you get the name Big Panda?
So the Big Panda thing was it's a nickname that was given to me in my first year of shooting. And I don't even know how it happened. Somebody called me that once and it stuck. So, and I'm a fun loving guy. So I'm like, hey, that's kind of cool. So I just rolled with it.
Awesome. I love it. Well, Charlie, thanks for cruising on up here to Lakewood to sit down the Three Gun Show World Studios and do the podcast with me. I'm going to enjoy the rest of the book. I'm going to read it and hopefully spread the good knowledge of the Charlie Perez method here. I love it. Thank you, man.
Cool. Awesome.
Hey, before you take off, be sure to check out the show notes at threegunshow.com/episode 185 for links to things that we discussed in the podcast. Like I said earlier, if you like what Charlie had to say in this interview, pick up a copy of his book, Path of Focused Effort, at the link in the show notes and dig deeper into your own game. This podcast is brought to you by Armalite. The original Armalite rifles put the AR in AR-15. The rifles themselves come with 1 8 twist barrels, match barrels, 18-inch or 13.5-inch with a 15-inch or 12.5-inch handguard, Timney trigger, Luth AR stock, adjustable gas system, tunable comp, a patented tunable comp. This thing's ready to go right out of the box for a 3-gun with no additional modifications other than putting on a nice optic. I myself use a Vortex Viper PST 1-6 when I'm shooting TAC Ops or their Spitfire when I'm shooting limited. Check them out at armalite.com. quick reminder that if you enjoyed this episode of the podcast, subscribe in iTunes, Google Play, Podcast Addict, or wherever you get your podcast content, so you will always get the very latest. Thank you so much for downloading, listening, and subscribing to the show. I'm Dave Hartman, and I'll see you on the range.
If you are finished, unload, show clear.